உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm Parthi Kandavel. Good afternoon, dear viewers. We hope you and your loved ones are keeping well. In today's show, we have the opportunity to speak with another mayoral candidate in this year's City of Toronto's municipal election, Mr. John Tory. Mr. Tory is not a stranger to the public eye. He previously served as the Ontario Progressive Conservative leader from 2004 to 2008. He also ran for mayor in 2003, coming second to David Miller. He has also been the CEO of Rogers Media and the president of the CFL. Until his announcement to seek the mayor's office recently, he hosted the live drive with John Tory on CFRB 1010. As always, we welcome your participation in our show. Please call us anytime at 416-623-8100. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the time to join us. In 2003, you put your name forward for the mayoral race. And, came very close, very few percentage points off. Mm-hmm. And however, you chose to sit out in 2007 and 2010. But this year, you're coming again to the Toronto electorate. So if you could give some context as to why not in 2007 and 2010 and now.
Well, in 2010, I had just finished being in provincial politics, and I just felt it was too soon for me to sort of re-enter the fray, as it were. Right. But I think as we sit here now in 2014, I love the city. I've lived my whole life here. Mm-hmm. And I just think if the challenge that's before us is to produce a city that's livable and that's affordable for people and functional, that the government works and gets mm-hmm. things done, mm-hmm. that the kind of skills and experience I bring now in 2014, where I'm a bit older and hopefully a bit wiser, are going to be particularly useful to people in terms of being able to get results, being an executive that's used to running big organizations, bringing people together. So, I think that it's just a good time for my resume to be put in front of people to have them consider me to be their mayor.
Mm-hmm. In 2010, David Miller in 2009, decided not to seek re-election. And we saw Rob Ford come to power. Many pundits will argue that he came on an angst that the suburbs felt towards the Miller administration. Specifically, people seem to have been upset with his handling of the garbage strike, the land transfer, the introduction of the land transfer tax, and the vehicle registration tax. Do you feel that premise is true, that there was a disconnect between what people call the inner suburbs of North York, Etobicoke, Scarborough with Miller's administration?
I think that Toronto in its amalgamated form, which goes all the way back, of course, to the late 90s, has never really come together as one city. And one of the reasons that I believe that I can make a positive contribution as mayor is because I think, and this is the functional part of my livable, affordable, and functional, is that I think it doesn't just mean having the council work as one and instead of working against each other, work with each other, but it also means that you start to get North York, Etobicoke, and Scarborough as much on board with things we need to do mm-hmm. as you do downtown, and everybody works together instead of any kind of a competition or a polarization, because I don't think that has been healthy. I think it has happened, mm-hmm. as you suggest. And I think that one of the things that I can do is to bring people together. My entire history as an executive with a big company, as the head of the CFL you mentioned, the head of the United Way in Toronto, where I went to every corner of the city, is about bringing people together. And I think that's what we need to do now, is to come together and say, for example, we must build the Yonge Street Relief Line to help people get to and from work and to and from their families and so on. We must do that. And we've got to do it now and not sort of wait around for another 10 years. And that's where you have to get everybody together to decide collectively that's a priority. And that's my number one priority.
To further examine those years from 2003 to 2010, what would you say you would have perhaps done differently if you had been in those shoes?
I think that one of the things that happened during that period, and it's a fundamental priority of mine, in addition to building the transit, the Yonge Street Relief Line, and mm-hmm. getting the transit system working better, is managing the finances. And we've got to, do an even better job than some of the start that's been made in the last 2 or 3 years at delivering results efficiently for taxpayers, keeping taxes low, property taxes especially, but at the same time taking the money we do have, which is billions of dollars, and spending it wisely and producing efficiencies in government. There's so much more that can be done in terms of making sure that government operates more efficiently at City Hall in Toronto. And again, I think my business experience and my experience in these large organizations is going to equip me well to be able to achieve that, to keep taxes low, but at the same time, actually improve services by looking for new ways to do things, by getting efficiencies out of the government that inefficiencies out that are things that are quite obvious.
That seems very similar to what Rob Ford came in with his argument to, the cut the waste or the gravy train, as he called it. Do you feel he's done that in these last 4 years? He's achieved those efficiencies?
Here's what I think has happened. I think there have been some small steps forward. I mean, I think, the contracting out of the garbage, some of the sort of changes to departments to do things more efficiently. But the problem is, in recent times, there's been far more attention being paid to sort of either the kind of polarized conflict between, say, downtown and the inner suburbs, or about personality-related issues, if I can call them that have created a huge distraction and have resulted in a situation where it seems almost impossible now to get anything through the City Council because of this series of distractions. And so that's part of the reason as well why I think that I can go there and why I think people have to ask themselves this important question. Which candidate do they think is most likely to be able to deliver results working with the council on the things they want, which is that livable city that means much better transit and transportation. It's the affordable city, which means keeping the taxes down, especially the property taxes, and attracting jobs and investment, by the way, something else I think that I could do. And then finally, the functional part, which is really what I'm talking about. How do you make this government work for people, work with each other instead of against each other? And I think that's why I'm putting my name forward.
You mentioned a priority of yours is the creation of a young street relief line or the downtown relief line. And you mentioned, with that there would be, currently proposed and planned is the Scarborough subway extension. Is that possible given our revenue tools, existing ones, to afford both the Scarborough subway extension and a downtown relief?
Well, first of all, I'd answer by saying we have no choice. I mean, we have to do both, and I'm saying we have to do both immediately. And by the way, I'm not proposing to reopen or in any way revisit the Scarborough subway. It's a decision that was painfully reached. It's done, and the money's been identified, and that's that, and it will go ahead. What I am saying is we now have to move ahead at the same time, not wait 10 years, 15 years to do the downtown relief, the Yonge Street relief line, and get on with it. And I will, in the course of the campaign, outline how I would propose to pay for it, to see the city pay for it. And I think it can be done. It needs the help of the other governments. And by the way, when I talk about a functional city government and a functional city, it also means better relations with the other governments who play an important part in a lot of these projects like the Yonge Street Relief Line.
Would that include new revenue tools as Civic Action has?
Well, I'm going to lay that out, and I, because I believe when you talk about building subways or any other form of public transportation, you have an obligation to say how you're going to pay for it, and I will do that in the coming weeks.
To finish off that discussion on transit, David Soknacki, who supported you in 2003, is running for mayor this year, and he's the only candidate thus far who's advocating revisiting the Scarborough subway extension and going to the original one city plan of the LRT, which on paper seems promising in that it costs less money and services more people. What's your position on that? Well,
my position is that in the end, I don't, first of all, I don't propose to reopen this. I don't think that's going to be, I think that's going to delay us another year or two, and I think we've got to get on with it. I think 25 years from today, we will look at the investment in a subway and say that was the right thing to do. I have always said that I want to support the Scarborough subway, but with a jobs plan that goes with it, because I think you have to help to address the numbers, which are the concern, the number of passengers who will be there to ride on that subway, and make sure that you have more jobs and employment activity in Scarborough, which I think is important. And then finally, I think in the end, I mean, yes, there will be fewer stops, but that doesn't mean less service. People will still be able to use a subway. They won't have to change trains or vehicles of any kind. They'll be able to ride right to the end of the subway as extended. And so Mr. Soknacki, of course, is entitled to his opinion on that, and I guess that's why we have elections. But in my case, I would propose not to reopen that and to get on with building the Scarborough subway and making it work by making sure you have a jobs plan that goes with it.
In 2010, the City Centre and the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto released an interesting graphic, and they tracked the changes in neighborhoods in Toronto through a class lens. And if we can have that image up, hopefully it'll come up and you get to see it. And it shows how in the 1970s, majority of Toronto was middle class neighborhoods. If we can see right over there, the top left-hand corner, we see the City of Toronto. Most of the yellow colored is middle class. If you look at the bottom in 2005, the red, which signifies the lower income areas, are majority of Toronto. What is your plan to readdress what has become a very what arguably, as the report shows, a very segregated Toronto by income and increasingly by race as well?
First of all, this is not a new issue for me. I mean, I've been working on this for many years through my work on the United Way, through my work on civic action. And we politely call the neighborhoods that are struggling priority neighborhoods, but that's our polite term for them. And I just saw a report this very week that says they're now looking at increasing the number from around 20 to, I think, 31. That can't be a good news story if you have an increase of 10 or 11, like 50% in the number of priority neighborhoods, places where people are struggling. And the map and the graphic we just saw shows that. I think it starts with things like transit. I mean, the reason you build transit isn't just to be able to say you did or draw it on a map. It's so you can connect people to opportunity. A lot of people who live in Jane Finch or Malvern or Chesterley or, you know, places like that, Lawrence Heights. Lawrence Heights is a bad example because they are on the transit line, but they're not easily connected to employment because they live in places that are underserviced. So you get the transit built, but you've also then got to attract more jobs and investment to Toronto generally. And that's something I think I'm going to be very good at and make an effort to do, a strong effort to do. And then I think we also have to look at redeveloping a lot of these neighborhoods. You have the examples now of Regent Park, Alexandra Park, and Lawrence Heights that are working with private-public partnerships to redevelop those neighborhoods. So I think that's where my very simple platform comes together to address a very complicated problem. The livable part builds the transit to help people get to and from opportunity. The affordable part makes it easier for people to live in the city by keeping taxes down, property taxes especially, and by attracting jobs. And the functional part means we're going to get results for people. And by the way, I mean, I am a strong supporter of these kinds of programs that give people a hand up in those neighborhoods because oftentimes they are just disconnected from the channels you need to follow to find a job or a better job. Oftentimes there are people who've come to the country with all kinds of skills, but they haven't been able to transition themselves into the Canadian labor force. So I have a history of commitment on those issues for years, and I'm going to put that to work for people as mayor.
And on that question of class, you come from a very prominent and privileged family, and some will argue that based on the basis of your background, that you wouldn't be able to connect with a lot of newer parts of Toronto. And how do you address that question, and whether you can build the trust necessary for people to, I guess, disregard what your critics will argue that may prevent you from connection?
I only ask them to look at my track record in my career. It's all about bringing people together and people from all walks of life. I mean, when I was the head of civic action until last week when I had to resign, I mean, I was as chair in the position of calling people together who were, an anti-poverty activist sitting next to a banker, sitting next to a labor leader, sitting next to an academic who'd studied poverty. And they came because I asked them to come and because civic action was respected as an organization. But I had the benefit of listening to all those people talk about these kinds of things. I've been in those priority neighborhoods. People know that. I mean, they know when I show up, I showed up years ago and to learn and to listen and so on. I think my success, as a business person, as a leader of the CFL, as a head of the United Way, should not be viewed as a negative, but rather as a positive, where I can put those skills and put those experience and put those contacts and put that approach that gets results to work for people to help with the priority neighborhood. So that, we'll have that discussion during the election. You
mentioned that you stepped down as chair of the Civic Action Board. You sit on the boards of corporations as well. Do you feel that you should, as some have asked or critics have asked, that you need to step down from the boards of corporations?
If I'm elected, of course I will.
No,
during the campaign, I mean, I see no reason. There's no conflict. I mean, I'm not in a position to be making any public policy or to be affecting anything. And my views, I mean, people know I'm on those boards, so if they want to raise that as a question in some way or other, they're quite entitled to do so. But no, I mean, I gave up my broadcasting career and I gave up civic action as a volunteer activity, but I'll keep those boards. I would think people would want to look at that and say, look, if these companies, huge companies with thousands of employees in Toronto, have the confidence in me and they want me there to provide them with advice on how to run their affairs and how to make decisions and build stronger companies and create more jobs, isn't that a good thing that the people of Toronto will want to take a look at and say, well, it's a compliment to him? So, but no, I'll be staying with those responsibilities, and that will not affect my ability to campaign, and nor will it affect my ability to discharge those responsibilities.
The Toronto Island Airport. In 2003 was a contentious issue, and I believe you supported building a bridge, whereas Divin Miller was opposed to it. That issue is coming to the forefront again with Porter's success and its expansion. What is your position on it this time around? Should we build a bridge connecting, allowing easy passageway for commuters?
No, I mean that's water under the bridge, as it were. But we have a tunnel now under the water. So there's a tunnel that's been built, or almost built, that's connecting the island. So that's issue's been dealt with. The issue now is about expansion of the airport, and I support the existence of an airport. I support Porter Airlines. They're a great story of having created jobs and attracting investment to Toronto. But I'm skeptical about the current expansion plans because there are so many unanswered questions. For example, about levels of traffic both in the air and on the ground, where we have sort of chaos sometimes on the shoreline when people are coming and going from the airport. And so I'm saying I'm very skeptical about that expansion plan until such time as those questions are answered, and we'll see what those answers are. But some of them may be coming in a study that's out later this month. We'll see. But for the moment, I'm skeptical because of those traffic levels.
Thank you, John. When we come back from break, dear viewers, we're going to be asking John about his thoughts on leadership. Please stay tuned after these short announcements. Welcome back to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm Parthi Kandavel. Today on CrossRoads, we have the opportunity to speak with mayoral candidate John Tory. John, I recently came across an interview when you spoke of a letter your father wrote in Christmas of 1991. And your father was a very prominent and successful businessman and lawyer. And in that letter he wrote to you, he spoke of, or I don't know if you call it a warning, but he encouraged you not to get into politics because of the compromises you'd have to make for your integrity. Your father passed away a few years ago, and how do you feel about that letter and your participation in politics since and prior?
Well, I guess I took his admonition and dealt with it in a way that was different than what he would have preferred. He would have preferred I stayed out of it because he felt that it was inevitable. If you went into it, you'd have to end up compromising yourself. And so I've tried to resolve that problem by being in public life, which I think is a place where I can make a contribution to produce that livable, affordable, functional city, but without compromising my integrity. And I think it's possible. I think it's entirely possible. It's a matter of will, like it is every other day of your life, whatever else you're doing, whether you're in broadcasting or law or business. You focus on not compromising your integrity and on maintaining it and building on it. And I'll do the same in public life. And so I feel that I'm able to kind of honor his concern, which wasn't so much you didn't or did go into politics, but that you did maintain your integrity.
And, in that space of a campaign, there's always a tension between your own vision and your own decisions and that of your team. And you've been part of several teams, from behind the scenes and in front of the cameras as provincial leader and as a mayoral candidate. This time around, what's your take? Is it going to be more John Tory or the team, and how do you strike that balance?
Well, for better or for worse. I mean, when people talk to me about my experiences in politics, they've had John Tory all the way through. Because I was once asked on the opening day of the 2007 election, what kind of persona are you going to project in this election campaign? And I said, I'm probably just going to be myself, because I find that a lot easier than trying to construct some personality that isn't me. And I'm going to be myself, and I hope people will respond well to that. I hope that they will say, you know what, here's a guy that's serious about a serious job, who is a person that is going to conduct himself in a manner that will make us proud to have him as mayor, who will address the question of making the city livable and affordable and functional because he has the skills and experience to do it. We like his resume, and he'll work with other people and get things done. And I hope that's what they'll say. And I was saying to somebody just at an event last night that, I guess I'll be pretty boring in some people's eyes, but they, and what their response was? We think boring would be fine. if it's producing results, if it's getting transit built, keeping taxes down, having the government work better, they'll take boring. You know, boring, you know what I mean by that, just where it's kind of like just good government. Good government isn't that exciting, but it's good for people.
As Bill Davis would call bland.
Well, he did, and you know what? He proved that it's true. Bland can work in the sense that you're focused on results for people, which aren't always exciting in the sense that they make huge front page headlines, but they get the transit built, they keep the taxes low, they get the jobs in here, the government works, you know, half the stuff that's written about City Hall is about people having conflicts with each other, and if those headlines and stories weren't written, I think that would actually be a good thing.
Coming back to a city issue and that of the police, David Soknacki called for a strategic review of the Police Services Board. Part of that is our crime rates have come down, especially since the height in 2005 in the summer of the gun, as it was so called. What are your thoughts on our funding for the police? A recent report highlighted a third of Toronto police officers making more than $100,000 a year. There was some blowback or opposition to that. And what's your plan for the police?
Well, first of all, you know, with respect to police and how they're paid, I mean, I think that you know, what we ask them to do to serve and protect us is something that, if you look at relative pay scales for lots of other jobs, I think that they're, you know, they're well paid, but they're paid to do a job that is also very important to us. But having said all that, I mean, my priorities will be to look to work with the police association and the police, you know, establishment, the chief and the others, to modernize both the way we do policing to try and achieve efficiencies, which I believe can be done. And I think you need to have those three people at the table: the city government, the police association, and the police, you know, police board, as it were, and the police chief, and to modernize accountability. I mean, I think that policing has changed as the city has changed, and that we're going to have to take a second look at all these different things that you know involve the oversight of the police to make sure those are effective and modern. And again, I think that's going to involve talking with the police association and with the police chief and the police board. Make no mistake, I mean, I am a supporter of our police service, and by the way, when people cite all these numbers that say crime is going down, I think part of the reason for that is because I ran on a platform in 2003 of saying we would put 400 more police officers on the street, and they actually were subsequently hired by David Miller, who at the time said he wouldn't do it. And I think that's part of the reason why the crime is down, because we have more police officers in the communities, on bikes, in cars, and that's helped to keep criminals at bay. And so I would look at modernizing policing and how it's paid for, and modernizing police accountability, and I think we need to have those discussions.
What are your thoughts on term limits in the U.S.? The mayoralty of New York and the presidency of the United States have term limits. What are and this discussion has recently come up in Toronto politics, especially given the huge advantage of incumbency for councillors. What's your position on the introduction of 2 terms or 3-term limits for councillors and mayor?
Your views sometimes evolve over time, and I was asked that question on the first day that I ran in 2003 for mayor, and I said the voters decide on term limits, and they may even decide somebody should be gone after 4 years because they've just not done a good job. My thinking is evolving on that, not to the point yet where I've sort of said, well, I'm now in favor of term limits, but I'm looking and I'm saying to myself, and by the way, I'm saying this as well in the private sector with corporations too, and their boards of directors, that if you want to be able to accommodate the fast pace of change that's taking place now, you have to have a certain degree of change that takes place in the governing bodies, whether it's a corporate board of directors or the board of governors of a university or your city council. And so I'm increasingly looking at things like that and sort of saying we probably should have that discussion about saying that, you know, we don't necessarily want, I mean, I'm not a believer in career politicians. And I say this without disrespect to people who have made their entire career in politics, but I think you need to have that movement back and forth so people bring to the job of public service on city council or elsewhere other experiences they've had in business, in the labor movement, as academics, as skilled tradespeople. You know, and whatnot. And I think you need that to be brought in so that you can kind of fully relate to the things you're responsible for administering. So I was a person who said 10 years ago, 11 years ago, don't think it's such a good idea. I'm now sort of thinking to myself we should have the discussion, because I think it might allow for us to have that kind of process of change that happens from time to time. And I'm not talking tiny little periods of time, but I'm talking after a chunk of time, you make way for some fresh blood.
Following with the U.S. comparison, the U.S. in many, if not all their cities, have a strong mayor system where the mayor has considerably more executive power, decision-making ability, and even jurisdiction, such as for education in New York City. Do you think Toronto should move to that model, given A, the dysfunction we've been seeing and have seen with the TDSB, and also the fractious nature of our council, which paralyzes any sort of growth or expansion? What are your thoughts on the strong mayor system?
I think you've always got to be looking at the City of Toronto Act, which is the law that governs who has what powers, and you've always got to be reviewing that in the context of the passage of time. But I would say let's try having a mayor that tries to produce that functional government first. Let's try having a mayor that realizes it starts at the top, and that if your attitude from day one is you're going to try and produce one city where you don't have polarization between the suburbs and downtown, as we were discussing earlier, where you try and get everybody behind the notion we've got to build the Yonge Street Relief Line and get on with that kind of project and keep taxes low. And it doesn't mean everybody has to vote the same way every day. That's not going to happen among a diverse council of 44 people. But surely we can do better at marshalling a majority of councillors, and they may be a different majority on different days on different issues, but surely we can do a better job. I mean, if you look back, people had the same powers or lack thereof as mayor in previous times, and they got lots of votes put through the city council to move forward with a lot of projects. So I'm just saying I think it starts at the top with a new attitude, a fresh attitude, to say you're going to make the city functional as well as being livable and affordable, and that's a top priority of mine, is to actually make the city council work under the present rules. Because since the province has to change the rules anyway, you can't assume they're going to be changed. You have to live with the rules as you find them.
And on that question of the mayoralty, the position, the office of the mayor, and leadership, how do you view the mayor's role as a leader on big picture issues, or someone that has to be in the trenches and fighting to get things passed through council and looking at the nitty gritty and the details within?
I think there's three, because you missed maybe one of that list. But I mean, yes, you are defined in law as the chief executive officer in effect of the organization and the head of the council. So it's your job to sort of set priorities and so on. But your second job, and this is the second area you referred to, is to make sure that when you have a good plan, in my case it's about livable, affordable, functional city, that you can work with the other councillors to get that plan implemented. Because in the end, if you can't, then you're not going to get very far. And then the third thing is to be not just a leader and a role model for the community, but also to be out in the community, keeping track of what people's priorities are and how things are going. So when I talked earlier with you about the priority neighborhoods, I mean, that will be something where I'm not going to sit in my office at City Hall and just decide that's the best way to address that priority, but rather I will be out there, as mayors should do. It's local government, and that means not just that it's local because it's close to City Hall, but it means it's local because you got to be out there in the areas, seeing for yourself what's going on. But you have to balance those. I don't believe it is the mayor's job to sort of, be personally. I mean, I think you have to make sure the government functions in such a way that everybody's problem is resolved. Whether it's that they have a problem with their water or with where they live or with something on their street, you have to make sure the government delivers that. I mean, you couldn't possibly keep up with solving everybody's problems personally, and you shouldn't be, because that is a default away from making the government work properly. And so I want to make that government work properly. That's the affordable part I talked about, where I want to achieve efficiency so people get better service when they call the government that they paid for with their tax dollars.
In politics, you'll have times when you'll have a certain position that may be not popular at a given time. Let's take the Yonge Street Relief. It may not be popular across all parts of Toronto, but how do you handle that balance? Specifically in 2007, when you ran as provincial leader, you had supported extending public funding to all religious schools, and there was much opposition to that, and your defense was that it was a matter of principle. How do you gauge when to allow something for popular opinion to ride through, as opposed to seeing something through? And
it's
like
one of
Medicare, for example.
It's one of the principal challenges of being in public office, is you have to decide, on how you can try and marshal the support necessary to get something through. And at a certain stage, are you prepared to make any kind of a compromise or a change to help that happen? And I can tell you that, the construction of the Yonge Street Relief Line may be controversial with some. I don't think so. I think most people will be supportive of it because they know that our current Yonge Street subway line is totally stressed out, and that there are people riding like sardines jammed into a can. There are people waiting 5 trains and getting to work late and getting home to their families late. But again, I think that's part of the functional city I talk about, is you've got to find a way to work with the other councillors to get them to agree with you on the priority of this and how it gets done. And does that mean that you're working around the edges of the proposal to make it acceptable to the broadest number of people? Of course you are. That's the art of governing. And so I think I can do that well. Again, my whole history has been about taking a plan that you have, whether it's in business or in charitable fundraising or with the football league or anything else, and getting it implemented. And it isn't always smooth where you write it down on a piece of paper and it happens exactly, like you wrote it down. I mean, nothing in life often happens that way. If you're driving along the road, I mean, rarely do you end up, getting there in exactly the number of minutes you thought, and sometimes you even have to take a detour. So, but the point is you get there, and we're going to get those results, and we're going to do what we have to do to make sure that's what happens. People want results. I'm going to deliver those results as mayor because I have the skills and experience to do it.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we
Well,
have
it's been
today.
great. Thank
But
you.
thank you for making time.
Thank you very
and
much for
visiting us.
having me. I appreciate
Thank you,
it very
John.
much. Thank you.
Dear viewers, please join us after these short commercial break. Welcome back, dear viewers. On this segment of Crossroads, we'll be discussing senior and old age care. We are joined with Andrea Ubell. She is the Senior Manager of Programs and Client Services at the Alzheimer Society of the York Region. Hemal Joshi, who's a social worker with the Alzheimer Society of York, as well as Saskia Sivanathan, who's doing her PhD at the UBC, or University of British Columbia, in health policy. As always, please join us at 416-623-8100 to participate in our conversation. Thank you, ladies, for coming on our show. Senior care is becoming increasingly a very important issue in the Tamil community. In Tamil, there's a proverb that translates as the utterances or the sayings of the elderly are like nectar, which goes to show that our culture appreciates the role the elderly play in our life. However, unfortunately, disease does set in, and one of the more tragic ailments is Alzheimer's. Andrea, I was wondering if you can give us a bigger picture about Alzheimer's, how it kicks in, and what does it mean?
Well, it is a disease that affects many people. It knows no boundaries, sex, a financial background, nationality. Everyone is unfortunately hit by the illness. 1 in 11 people over the age of 65 are affected. It also affects people younger, and we don't realize that about 2% of all people are younger than 65 with a diagnosis. Currently, we have about 500,000 Canadians living with the disease. What is scary is the rising tide and the growth, which is exponential, so that probably within one generation we'll be close to 1.1 million people living with dementia. And it's not just the one person who's affected, because it's the whole family. There's some statistics that talk about 11 people directly related when a person is diagnosed. And we have the misconception that it's just memory, and it's not just memory. It is memory, we do see that, but it's language, it's reasoning and judgment, it's personality. And as the disease progresses, it takes on a much more physical presentation. So it will affect people totally, and people become, over a period of time, completely dependent on others for everything.
Hemal, in the South Asian community, and which includes the Tamil community, there's certain stigmas associated with Alzheimer's. How can we as a community best overcome it, and how do we start to identify when a family does need care?
Yeah, so the most common myth in our community is, forgetting or memory loss is part of aging, right? Like, when you grow older, there will be memory loss. Like, that's how, I have been raised, and, that's how people know. But we are going out and spreading the words around. People have not even heard the name as dementia and Alzheimer's, because they haven't seen this as part of not normal aging, right? So the main thing is that this is not healthy part of aging, and it affects the daily life. And right now people what we are doing right now is we are going into the communities through workshops and seniors wellness groups, and they will say, yeah, I'm on Aricept, but we don't know what it is for. Like Aricept, it's a cognitive enhancer drug, and so more explanation about what this disease is, and how you best manage your daily life. I think that's what main challenging part right now for the person with the disease and the family members too. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the myth we are working on right now.
Saskia, what are some of the triggers or causes or maybe early indications of Alzheimer's?
Well, it's interesting because in terms of triggers, we don't actually know the cause of Alzheimer's or dementia. That's part of what makes it such a scary disease. As Andrea explained, it affects everyone, and it can strike at any time. Some of the symptoms, as Andrea mentioned, the earlier symptoms are forgetting, memory loss. It might be misplacing things, but that continues and progresses into other symptoms that you can see. So personality changes occur, sometimes behavioral changes as well, things that person would not normally have done. So becomes apparent, and eventually they're unable to take care of themselves, right?
Andrea, from your experience, when does a family make that decision for their loved one to perhaps leave their home into a full-time care facility?
That's a really difficult decision because for every person that is unique. It depends on the person with the illness and how it's presenting. It depends on how the family's coping. It depends on the resources that the family has. Everyone comes to the decision of long-term care differently. People sometimes are able to manage care at home throughout the whole course of the illness. That's exceptionally rare because it does become an issue where there's a much more medical presentation to the illness. And there are symptoms of the illness that can be very detrimental for the person with the illness. One of the projects that we'd like to talk about this is Finding Your Way, which is a new provincial program, and Hemal's been very involved with that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's called Finding Your Way program. It's the initiative of Ontario Senior Secretariat, OPP, like police is involved, and Alzheimer's Society, different chapters are involved. So what we are trying to do is the fact was that a lot of people, like six out of 10 people with dementia does wander, right? They go missing in their disease period. So what we are doing right now is we are raising awareness in the community level that, about the risk. Because if the person is not found within 24 hours, the person might, severely injured or they might die. So what we are doing through this project is we are working with different stakeholders like community partners. Like we are working with a lot of South Asian community organizations right now. So we are spreading awareness that, in your community neighborhood, if you see somebody who's not, wearing proper clothes depending on the weather, somebody who is really confused, have no shoes, and so how do you identify and how you call police or call 211 or call Alzheimer chapters. So what we are trying to do is we want to prevent any missing incident, because if the person goes missing and not found within 24 hours, we are talking about life and death of the person. So right now, through this project, we are talking to the community that even though we use a lot of measures, like at family level, we use a lot of tracking devices, like, using different programs, wearing the bracelet through, Safely Home program, or there are different programs for tracking. But even though they are, people with dementia don't wear that, and they just, if they are focused, they will go out anyhow. So that time, we as community, we as partners, how can we get involved in that?
And that might be one of the incidents that leads someone to have to contemplate long-term care.
They recognize that they have to
and that's the type of
care.
symptom that might trigger it.
Right. Saskia, so once a family has made that decision to place their loved one in a care facility, and after some time, and if the family feels that the care in the facility isn't the greatest, and they have concerns with it, what are the options for that? That's something not only in old age care facilities, but also in hospitals we're dealing with, is the quality of care.
Right. Well, I guess starting with nursing homes and long-term care, one of the things in place is, especially Ontario, but a lot of the provinces have something called the Residents' Rights, Bill of Rights. And essentially it outlines what your kind of care you're entitled to. You're entitled to safety, you're entitled to respect, that sort of thing. And if a loved one, you feel like they're not getting the right type of care or the kind of quality, the first way is probably to take it up with the home itself. If you're at the home, you can talk to the administrator of the nursing home. But if that doesn't work, the Ministry of Health in Ontario, for example, has a phone number, if you go to their website, where you can call and report a complaint. Okay. And efforts are being made to make that more public, so any complaints or reasons that homes have had issues are publicly available now. And if that's not possible, you can also take it to your local ombudsperson. Okay. And there's a phone number there as well.
In the community, there recently, as far as I know, there are at least 2 Tamil seniors homes in Scarborough. Right. And they're obviously privately run. Right. From your research, what is the difference in care between a privately run seniors home and a publicly run or a publicly financed one?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it's something that we'd love to do in research. So because homes are private, we don't get access to them, so we don't really know what kind of care is being provided. And they don't necessarily have to run within the same legislations and the same regulations that public homes do. So we don't have much data on private homes. In terms of public nursing homes, there are very tight regulations, and that differs by province. And I spent 2 weeks at 2 homes in Ontario, and that was a very interesting experience. And what we find is that the focus is really on medical care, and that is really what a nursing home is, right? To provide safety and to provide that sort of medical care that you can't get at home anymore.
And I think on that topic, I think that's it's almost a show on its own on how life within the quality of care in a senior's home, and certainly I'll be having you on again to further dissect that research. Andrea, in terms of our viewers watching and who may have a loved one who suffers from Alzheimer's, is there any hope? And what's the blunt reality of somebody who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
I get to deliver the bad. It is a fatal illness. I mean, I think that's the thing to understand, that as the disease progresses, people will die or die with dementia. However, we are learning that people who get diagnosed earlier, families that are involved in the care earlier, people can live quite well early in the disease if people have the right tools, if people are supported with their community. And I would say to any family, reach out to a mainstream Alzheimer's Society chapter. Most of us have the ability to get a translator. Most of the people who are doing the reaching out are the kids or the grandkids, because we're dealing with families that have many generations. And we can get you information on how best to manage the care, what to do, what not to do, how to interact, what type of resources are available in your community. We have mainstream day programs at our Alzheimer's Society. That might be a fabulous option for a family, where they can come and have a family member spend 5 days a week with us while people are working. There are community agencies that come into the home and provide care.
All right. Hemal, a friend of mine, unfortunately her mother suffers from Alzheimer's, and what her parents have done, and they're quite elderly, so they've moved back to Sri Lanka actually to live the rest of their lives out there. Have you seen that as an option or alternative for other South Asian families to live out their Alzheimer's in their country of birth and where they grew up?
Yeah, a lot of times we get this, because it depends on what is your support system here, right? So if you have 12 uncles around you, or 12, at least minimum, because as Andrea mentioned, it affects like 11 people, like 10 to 11 people. You need that kind of support system, because one day somebody is with, Monday, this nephew is with him, and, this is what the story we hear. So we also have people going, like, snowbirds, go and come back. So also we help them to plan their trips and stuff like that. But it's just our message that, there are services out there, we are, as mainstream organization, because what we have seen from South Asian perspective, the families have called us in the middle stage or later middle stage compared to the other communities. So it's just that we are here to break up that, there are still representation out there, and the early you approach, the better you are equipped with care, because you will need multiple hands in order to care for this disease.
As our final question, Saskia, I was wondering if you can speak to the questions involved when a family, beyond Alzheimer's, when a Tamil family makes that decision to send or thinking about a care facility for their loved one. What should they think about? Because they obviously feel a sense of obligation.
Right. No, and that's an important point, as Hemal pointed out. Especially within the Tamil community and South Asian community in general, you don't want to see your loved one or your grandparents or your parents at a nursing home, and so people try to manage as long as they can at home. But you can have the sort of support and outreach through home and community care, through the Alzheimer's Society, and they can provide that early care to help you stay at home longer if that's what you wanted. There is a stigma attached to moving to a nursing home or having someone placed there, and I think we need to better understand the reasons for why people need to do that. That it's that they need medical care that they can't get at home.
All right. Thank you, Saskia. Thank you, Hemal, and thank you, Andrea, for making time to talk about this very important issue. Dear viewers, as our community plants deeper roots in Canada, we create and recreate our Tamil Canadian society. It's important that we better and further understand our past, our present, and our future. I hope today's show helped shed some light on the Toronto municipal election, as well as old age and senior care and those suffering with Alzheimer's. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Parthi Kandavel. Have a good week.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.